Well, I'm looking forward to finding out how this presentation goes as well. But what a wonderful opportunity to engage with everyone here on the future of education. And I know from the panels and the conversations and the explorations of gamification and new ways in which, for example, particularly what iSpring is doing to bring this forward in ways which really support the learner and the learning provider, right? The one who can help facilitate the learning in new and powerful ways, really combining technology in humanistic support systems. So let's explore a little bit from my perspective. I'm really excited to be able to share with you some of my thoughts here on education for the future. Learning to human well together. And this idea of learning to human well, I really like this idea of the verb. How do we human well? And how do we do this together? So let's explore some things, how we're setting ourselves up for this. First of all, as we have seen already on several of the panels, the pace of education really needs to speed up. In the sense that it has to catch up with the way in which culture is working. Education is one of the most sophisticated, designed systems for fostering human evolution. But at the same time, it has become one of the most sub-optimized. I mean, if you were to take some teacher in a standard classroom around the world, now there's a lot of variation, of course, but from 200 years ago, and you pick them up and you put them into a classroom today, they would feel pretty comfortable. They know there, of course, there's variation. Things have gone from black and white to color. No, I'm kidding. But the point is that people would be pretty comfortable in the roles, what the students do, what the teacher does, and so on. In, let's say, the average classroom around the world. Now, they're cutting edge classrooms as well, but I'm just saying average educational system. So what we really need to be doing here is focusing on ways in which the relational modes and modalities of the modern educational system continue to promote habits of thinking and norms of being that are less and less relevant. So conferences like this, symposia like this that explore then, okay, how do we bring this up to speed? How do we change not only the platforms, but the way in which we engage, the way in which we human well with others? So what happens when people are stuck in this educational system, this one that I was just talking about, that is very backward looking, let's say, or that is very stasis based, and don't really learn how to deal with life in a dynamic, changing world? Sometimes we get stuck in place.
Whoa, that's not good.
Oh, I don't need this. I'm already late.
Somebody will come. Anybody out there?
Do you have a phone?
No. Sorry. Somebody! Hello? There are two people stuck on an escalator and we need help. Now, would somebody please do something? Help! I don't believe this. You gotta be kidding me.
I'm gonna cry.
Well, there's not enough left to do.
So she says at the end, I'm going to cry. And he says, well, there's nothing else left to do, is there? I mean, how much of our educational system is gearing us towards doing tasks and fulfilling roles that we can do really well and we can carry out excellently? But what happens when things change, when either something breaks down or there's a change in the environment, the conditions? Often we are stuck in a rut because the educational system has not prepared us for variance. How do we deal with things that aren't just what is taught in the standard curriculum? So this is part of what I want to be exploring with you today. So a lot of what we would call this kind of world that we're living in goes by the terms VUCA, RUPT, and BANI. What do they mean? First of all, Tom Attlee, a colleague of mine, says things are getting worse and worse and better, faster and faster. Well, it's kind of the way things are. So how do we deal with that? We got what the scientists tend to refer to as VUCA environments, VUCA situations: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. The humanists and the social scientists, they tend to refer to it as rupt, because the experiences that people have, they seem that things are rapid, unpredictable, paradoxical, and tangled. And often is also in the literature referred to as bani, where life and reality appear brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible. Hey, how do you have an educational system that helps people deal with things that are incomprehensible? It's not easy, because most of our education is focused on case studies sort of things. Well, we know the end, we know the outcome. We can teach to knowns. How do we help people deal with situations that, again, more and more, because things are getting worse and worse and better, faster and faster, are this kind of VUCA, RUPT, or BANI situations. Back already in 1989, Lester Milbraith wrote, "As a society, we have learned better how to learn." Sorry, we have to learn better how to learn. I call it social learning. It is the dynamism for change that could lead us to a new kind of society that will not destroy itself from its own excesses. For we must share a vision for a new society before we can realize it. Designing a better society and maintaining a good life require deep thought and sustained effort by all of us. Reasoning together is the only way we can bring it about. So classrooms as places for reasoning together, but having that vision not only of the subject matter, but also how does this create a more thrivable society? I think this is where I want to have us focus on. So for me, this is a time to innovate new educational vehicles, not only for lifelong learning, which we talk about, and we have seen that in several of the presentations, but also life-wide learning, so that you're not learning only in the confines of a classroom. You're learning wherever you are. And life-deep learning, which has to do with matters of the heart, has to do with even questions of spirit. How do we learn those aspects which make us fully human? The traditional brick and mortar schools with fixed learning environments, which are classrooms, and siloed subject matter courses with standardized one-size-fits-all learning modalities are not up to the task of preparing learners for life in a VUCA or RUPT world, right? So this is what I want to explore. How do we do this? Now, what's interesting for me is that in business, in the business world, industry has been seen to go through a variety of changes and kind of different manifestations, different stages. We've gone from industry 1 of mechanization to industry 2, electrification, then automation, then digitalization, and now it's more about personalization, what is being focused on. My challenge to all of us here is, can we do a similar mapping for education? Or are we talking about education 1.0, and now it's really where we have that classroom set up, and now what we do in the classroom is maybe slightly modified because now we do it on tablets instead of on paper. So now it's maybe education 1.1. But how do we get to education 2, education 3, education 4.0, and education 5.0? Here's some tips that I think, for me, are part of the answer. I don't have the answer specifically for this, but I would like to explore this with you. So partly it's also updating the basics. You know, there's a big push to focus on STEM education, right? Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And there's a big push for that, getting back to those basics. But what's missing from this is that which makes us more human. And that's where people have now added to this term to make it STEAM. They added the A for arts, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And that starts to bring in the humanities and the ability to think in terms of value frames. But it's still missing the relational components. How do we human well involves not just the science, technology, engineering, and math, and even with the arts. It involves a kind of relational intelligence. And this is what makes it STREAM. Science, technology, relational intelligence, engineering, arts, and mathematics. Okay, so I've just expanded the curriculum. So we have to focus not only on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, but also relational intelligence and arts. However, in order to deal with this VUCA and RUPT world, it is essential that we develop and cultivate these abilities as well. Einstein, clearly having a bad hair day here, said that the intuitive mind is a sacred gift and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. Created a society who? Well, you know what? It mainly comes down to educators and the educational frame. I mean, again, if you focus on STEM only and not on STREAM, you're never going to honor that the sacred gift, right? Or the intuitive aspects of our being, which is a big component of what it means to be human. So how do we cultivate this in education? We have to move from not just thinking abilities to feeling and being. Now, systems thinking is all about seeing the big picture, thinking not in terms only of positions and of structures and of static things, but thinking in terms of dynamics, of relationships. And we've had some presentations already earlier today about the holistic frames of looking at things. This is systems thinking, but it needs to be beyond systems thinking. We need to go into systems feeling so we can sense things, because we are feeling humans after all. That is part of what means to human well. And then to systems being, where we do more than just act on the world, but we see ourselves as part of the world, acting through it. It's a different framing. So maybe part of the Holy Grail is to develop educational that really cultivates collective intelligence, because, you know, this VUCA world can't be solved by any one individual smarty pants. We need to be working together with our collective intelligence. You know that expression, no one of us is as smart as all of us. How do we cultivate collective intelligence? Well, let me backtrack. You need a prerequisite for collective intelligence, and that is connective intelligence. Connective intelligence is the ability to know with whom are you going to collaborate, what information sources are you going to use, what resources can you bring to play, what networks can you be a part of. That's connective intelligence. And then when you activate that, you can bring in then the collective intelligence. But there is still a precursor, a previous frame. Before connective intelligence, we need to cultivate empathetic intelligence. This is core to humaning well. It's the care why competencies. So we teach know how and know why competencies in schools. But do we teach about why should we care about each other, about nature, about the future? This is part of that stream, right? Relational intelligence that needs to be cultivated. And here's, I'm wrapping up my presentation now, but here's perhaps something on the ways in which I like to do that through these 5 different domains. I have an article there linked in the bottom. You can find out more about that in this brief article on Medium. But for me, there's these 5 domains. First, we need to be in balance with ourselves, right? When we see ourselves in the mirror, do we, say horrible things to ourselves? Or do we say loving things? And are we eating right and getting in our exercise, things like that, getting enough sleep? Gosh, in educational systems, often that's a big challenge. So that's part of our personal balance, the interpersonal balance. Then there's the interpersonal. Hey, how are we with other people? Not just in the classroom, but in our neighborhood, in our communities. Are they dysfunctional? Is there sabotage and intrigue? Happens a lot, especially in companies. How do we make this healthy? That's the second level which we can learn how to human well. The third level of humaning well is really trans species. So we see ourselves as part of a web of life. Are we stepping on nature's toes? Or are we a positive, constructive component of our living environment? Okay, that's the third level. All of these 3 first levels are what's called isochronic, or they happen at the same time. The 4th level makes it diachronic, brings it across time. And we start to think in terms of our relationship with our ancestors and with future generations. Are we in conversation with our ancestors? We should be, because they have done a lot to be able to create the conditions for us to live in. And what are we doing as future ancestors now, as ancestors in training? How are we preparing the world for future generations? So these are things that even the students need to think about now, right? And then there's this biggest picture, understanding that we're part of a big narrative, a narrative that is not just based here on planet Earth. Planet Earth is a small speck, as Carl Sagan once said, a small blue dot in this big universe that's unfolding. And if the whole Earth gets wiped out, it's not going to make a very big difference in this big narrative, but there is a narrative there. And learning that we're part of a bigger unfolding is part of this framing of this beautiful narrative of unfolding in the world. And it brings you right back to your personal narrative, right? Your personal balance. So I want to end up with this concluding quote. Imagination is the beginning of creation. First, you imagine what you desire. Then you will what you imagine. And at last, you create what you will. George Bernard Shaw. And this, for me, is part of the idea where we say, well, hey, how are we supposed to bring in this kind of living classroom where people are humaning well and where they are being able to be more in touch with their relational intelligence as well? I think it is possible. And I'm going to show you this little example. I'm going to have to switch out here for one moment. The thing with this is, again, imagine this. This is a very specific kind of video about a school that is very experimental. And I'm not suggesting that all schools do this, but just to think about the fact that this is possible for me is inspirational. So let's look at what they do here. I'm clicking on the next slide. Thank you. There. Yay. So this is why, by the way, you could use PowerPoint and not Keynote. Okay, that's a little plug for iSpring. So what I want to share here is just this concluding slide to the challenge. Remember I had, so how we can move from industry 1.0 to industry 5.0, and then the parallel challenge now for education is to do the same thing. What does that mean? Maybe it is through stream rather than just STEM, and maybe it is through this kind of emotional, social emotional learning, and perhaps we'll talk about that in the question and answers as well. But for me, this is a beautiful expression here. Be, Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. But for me, it's about be the educational system. You be yourself, be part of this. Be the ecosystems you want to see. So you don't end up saying, hey, I'm a human being trying to save the rainforest or save, something like that. I'm part of the rainforest trying to save itself. But you see what's nice about this expression is it counts on the first thing there saying, be you in the world. Be you in the world. So we got to start. And then it has the empathy component saying the systems want to see. What do they want to see? How can you sense into what is seeking to emerge with heart, with beauty? So this is the challenge, to be the systems you want to see in the world along all those 5 dimensions, the personal, the interpersonal, the trans species, the transgenerational, and the pan-cosmic. And with that, I'm done. Thank you so much.
Fantastic, Alexander. That was very, very inspiring. And I can see that a lot of our participants are supporting me and sharing that this was a very interesting way of looking at education from a very life perspective. And we do have our first questions. So welcome everybody to also join the discussion. We still have some good time for questions and answers. So I'll start with reading the first question, and I hope that you will bring some more on the plate. So the question comes from Shaji. Dear Alexander, thank you for the amazing session. What should we collectively start practicing to bring education 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, and so on?
Well, again, the simple and not so simple answer is practice how to human well. But that, I think, fundamentally has this components of practicing that empathetic intelligence first. And that means listening well, listening to those 5 dimensions, listening to ourselves, to each other, to nature, to our ancestors and future generations, and to this deeper level of the cosmos and to our emerging role in this unfolding story. So listening well, I think those are the skills which I would love to see both educators and students learn how to do better. Listening to their environment, to each other, to nature, all those things that I mentioned. I think that's perhaps one of the places to start. You were mutable, Chris.
Right, of course I am. As I'm telling you, the machines go against us. Or maybe it's just us staying so late. There is a comment from A3 saying that it's very interesting. We do intensive customer service and we do lots of listening exercises. I guess that was a part of the comment, that what you were referring to, right? Active listening, empathic listening, etc., etc. Right. Thank you very much. May I also jump in with my question here? Because you mentioned in the start that we are moving towards personalization in terms of industry, but at the same time, we're not really moving into personalization in education in many other areas of our life. It might be a bit of a tricky question, but do you think we're moving in personalization in any human-related areas apart from economy and consumption?
Well, yeah, and I think there are some wonderful things happening in education. We've seen that a bit here in the wonderful speakers and the panels that you've had earlier here in the iSpring conference. You know, I want to bring two examples, if I may. One is, I have some friends and colleagues who are working on an app that is supporting teachers and students in social and emotional learning. So you got this technology that helps the students and the teachers with social and emotional learning and connecting themselves to themselves, to each other, and to nature. And a lot of these activities that the app helps the teacher organize and helps the students engage with are not only nature-based, but they kind of build in that aspect that helps counter these orientations that build towards attention deficit disorder, even nature deficit disorder, right? So this app is called Kikori, and it's phenomenal. My friend Kendra Bostic is heading that up and doing these ways in which people can learn how to be the systems kind of engagement with all things. That's one place in Kikori, K-I-K. Then this other is this interesting innovation we already saw about gamification a little bit. One wonderful, and also about the role of AI, by the way. One wonderful game that is now coming out is put out by this organization called Earthwise, and they have this game called Elwyn, Quest of Time, and it's a real role-playing game. You have magicians and you have Moloch, who's the bad guy, but instead of learning to kill the opponent and to destroy them, you learn how to cooperate with other players to transform the environment, to transform this negative frames into something. But it's not something that's like moralistic, and because there are a lot of these edutainment games which you end up having to learn so much about how to be good that it's no fun. This is a fun game and engaging. And I think these kind of games brought into education through edutainment and also through these kind of apps like Kikori, these social and emotional learning apps, they're, for me, promoting this move towards more of an education 2.0, 3.0 frame.
Right, Alexander. Thank you so much. I've also shared the link to this game with the participants meanwhile you were speaking, so welcome. Feel free to explore. I do appreciate those very practical examples. I'm sure the participants will take a lot from them. Just also reflecting upon what you've said, it feels like this beautiful phrase you mentioned, nature scarce environment, communication scarce environment. These are the, let's say, challenges that a lot of developing countries can actually easily catch up on, because when we speak about technological advancements and lots of other characteristics that we believe should be inherent with every progressive educational system, we very often hear that, oh, it's the developed countries that can afford that kind of technology and advancements. But at the same time, there's so many things that the developing countries can do in order to actually approach humaning well together. And they do not really need a lot of technologies and advanced items for introducing that.
Right. And yeah, I think really what you're touching on here, Chris, is this ways in which we can connect.
Hmm.
How do we connect? Because, often we'll say, hey, I just need to connect to the internet, right? And I'm going to get connected to, yeah, but often that disconnects us from those other five domains that I mentioned. Disconnects us from ourselves, disconnects us from each other, disconnects us from nature. So there's the balance, otherwise we get into these frames that sociologists have now these terms, the zombification of our society. What is the zombification? Where people are staring at their phones all the time and they're just like, and they're like, they're not there. And then they trip over things, they bump into people, they have accidents. There's part of the zombification. And we get to a situation where we end up being tech dependent instead of tech enabled. So the question is, how does the technology enable us to be more human? Not how does it help us be more like the people on the escalator, stuck on our escalator, and like, hey, we don't even know how to get off an escalator because we got so
Ourselves.
stuck in our. Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
exactly. Where do we lose this autonomy? Right. And there is another question that came from the audience, and we'll probably be wrapping it up with a couple of last questions. So, would you please elaborate on the concept of gamification as you understand it?
Right. So, and there was a wonderful session earlier also in this, specifically on gamification here on the iSpring conference today. But for me, gamification is the way in which we can take any matter and make it engaging, fun. There's this fantastic book that was written in the 70s by James Carse called Finite and Infinite Games. And in that book, he talks about the way in which you could look at all of everything, all of life, as a kind of a game. I mean, relationships, driving to work, a game that counts. I mean, there's life and death stakes in some of these things, right? So it's not as if you're trying to cheat, no, but it's a game you're playing. You can make it fun. There are infinite games, which is like life. Of course, there's a finite point to that. But there are also finite games like chess or like tennis or something where you finish the game and say, okay, we'll see you next time. But how do we learn? I think that learning to survive in a VUCA and RUP world requires us to be able to play this game, just like the Eloin game that I was mentioning to you from Earthwise. That's helping us learn how to play this game in a game environment, but the learnings, the lessons are relevant to our real world challenges. That's the kind of gamification that I think is really useful, where we can learn something through a game, through play, but we can apply it then to how to human well in our real world challenges.
Right, Alexander, thank you so much. And I'll be wrapping this up with a final question. I just wanted to make sure that the participants come out not with just the inspiration and some practical tips that you've shared with them, but maybe with some resources that they can later address to also grab more knowledge and more inspiration on humaning well together. So maybe you'd like to advise one or two other books apart from Finite and Infinite Games that you've already mentioned. Anything that you believe could be a good starting point for the people to think about those evolutionary concepts that you mentioned?
Well, yeah, a couple of, let me mention three things here.
Okay.
One is a work that I'm doing with our shared colleague, Pavel Luksha of Global Education Futures.
Thank you for mentioning that.
Sure. And there are a lot of good resources there. We're about to make Global Education Futures 2.0. It's going to go through an entire reboot, basically. But we have also an initiative called Education for Earth. University for Earth, which is something that we're a very different kind of learning process that brings all of this into play. Anyway, that's one place, one orientation. There's a website on that. Then there is an article that I've shared with the organizers here, with April Collins and others, on thrivable education, or the new paradigm in education. Actually, I don't remember the title. I wrote the darn thing, but I don't remember it. But it's the new paradigm in education, and I explore not only some of these concepts, but also places and examples of initiatives that are starting to do this kind of thing. So the second part of the paper looks at that. So you have that paper, and I'm sure that could be shared as a link as a resource for others. And the last thing is, well, my website. On my website, there's a whole section on, if you go to the dive deeper section of my website where we can dive into things. It talks a lot about systems thinking and so on, and sustainability and leadership, but there's an area on education as well, on learning. And so that's, I think, could be another good resource for everyone. As well as on my presentation is the link for my website as well, I think either on the first page or the last page of the slides, but more than welcome. And I am at your disposal for anyone who's interested in further exploring these ideas and how to apply them.
Great. Thank you so very much, Alexander. It was an absolute pleasure to have you again and to collaborate with you, even on this short instance. I'm sure it was a very inspiring piece of content for the participants.
Well, thank you so much. And to the entire iSpring's team, here's a good example of a place that does both the technology and the humaning well nicely. So, and thank you for being a great exemplar of how to human well.